Well, welcome back to But We're Different Live. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, But We're Different Live is a weekly virtual event for revenue professionals who want to think differently about growing their businesses. We here at Impact have a team of coaches and trainers that are at any given time working with over 75 companies, helping them close the trust gap and achieve what we call sales and marketing mastery. Everything I'll share with you during these sessions is what we see firsthand from the companies that we work with. And here's what we know. The way people buy has changed. And yet most companies still haven't changed the way that they market and sell. And it's our mission here to take these insights and help you adapt to these changes so that you can ultimately grow your business. My promise to you is that you will always leave with actionable takeaways that you can do immediately in your organizations to improve your current growth strategies and execution. Again, thank you for your time and being here today. We know there's many different ways you could be spending this hour, but the fact that you're spending it with us means a lot to us. So Nick, with that, let's get into it.
So today, we are going to continue our conversation on the Big Five. And we're going to combine two of them because they are pretty similar, and they are reviews content and best of content. So to frame this more clearly, when we talk about review content, we mean content that addresses the question, what are other people saying about this product or service? And when we say best of content, we mean content that addresses the question, what are the best options out there? Now, before we dive into these topics, I think it's important to mention that what we're about to cover is a very different way of approaching marketing and overall buyer education than probably what most people are used to. And no one is teaching this in marketing schools, and that's because it's not a conventional approach. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. So this conversation starts with accepting a fundamental truth about how we all buy things. And that's accepting the fact that buyers are absolutely obsessed with knowing what everyone else loves, who they hate, and how they stack up against each other. Now, if you think about it, you got some big players in reviews in the best of game. You think Google or Yelp reviews for the brick and mortar business. We have the G2s of the world if you're selling a B2B SaaS product. Amazon reviews if you sell a physical product. And for us, we're a HubSpot service partner. We have the HubSpot directory review system. So needless to say, we are a society that cares a whole lot about what everybody else thinks about stuff. Now, even though this is a truth about the way we all shop, the fact is that if a buyer wanted to know any of this stuff about your solution, your product or service or category, it's more than likely that no one could tell them or no one could help them. And so if buyers want to see these types of ranking and review systems, it is our job to give it to them. And that's exactly what we're going to cover today. So Zach, break this down for us. What is so unconventional about creating this type of content in the first place?
Because it is unconventional. And sometimes in communication, that's what it takes to really cut through. The bit of a paradox that exists with best of content, because for, I would guess 100% of us in the last 30 to 60 days, you've searched for something, or you've started your buyer's journey by searching for something. What is the best this? Who is the best that? And the reason that we do that is not because we always buy the best. It's because we want to be familiar with what are the options. We want to quickly be able to narrow down some options, right? If we had the opportunity to narrow down 100 options to 10, we would take that pretty quickly. That's why we start these journeys like that. It helps us get targeted. But it's unconventional because as organizations, we would think, well, we don't want to talk about anybody else's stuff but ours. How is talking about somebody else's stuff or other options going to help them? That's what we think. But that's, again, the difference between thinking like a business versus thinking like a buyer. With reviews, it's a bit of a paradox as well, because I think we could all agree, we all know that our buyers, our customers, our prospects, they want to hear, like Nick said, what are people saying about this? What are other people saying about this thing? So we know that they want to know that. But we assume then that means that only the customer base could review something and it be credible. So we think to ourselves, well, we can't review our own stuff because that would be biased. They're not going to believe it, or it's not going to have as much weight if we're the ones that are doing the reviewing of our product, of our service. But here's also what we know is that if there's anybody that should be talking about your product or service, it should be you. And there is a way to do it in an unbiased fashion, which we'll talk about today. But that is the great key, right? Thinking like a business versus thinking like a buyer. If they want to quickly narrow down their options and know what's best, who's best in any given category, we should be the ones teaching it to them. If they want to hear an unbiased review and therefore feel better about a purchase, then we're going to give that to them. But that's unconventional because oftentimes we don't think like the buyer, we think like the business.
You bring up a great point on this one because when we think about the best, it isn't specifically focused around the best in the world, and I think we get lost in that when we try to create content about our thing. It's about what is best for our needs, right? Like the buyer's needs. When does this package up and present itself as the best situation for someone in creating those conditions and setting that up so that someone can understand and self-select? They can identify this thing is the best for me. I don't need the best thing in the world to do the job. I just need the thing that is right for me. So why is there such a lack of information on these topics in most industries?
It's interesting. Before you can go make best content that's going to be quality content, you need to believe that as a business, we have enough information where we don't just sell or educate our business, we educate an industry. It's like moving ourselves one rung higher almost. We need to believe that we're the best people to educate folks on an entire industry. In certain industries, like there's the obvious player already. There's the WebMD, there's the G2. And so tech companies don't even think they're going to go up against those guys. But under other industries, like they have a huge gap in this space. And there hasn't been someone to step up in the space. And so I shared this like working paragraph with everyone that's thinking about writing their best of content for the first time so that they realize that they can educate people on an industry, is that here at Impact, we recognize there's not better and worse coaching and training companies out there. There's just better and worse fits for your needs. And we believe everyone deserves to find the right fit for what they're looking for, which is why in our sales process, we prefer to educate people on the entire space and help push them in the right direction of what they're looking for so that they can find the best thing for them. It's like an amazing moment where all of a sudden they go, whoa, like they're willing to say who they're not a good fit for by showing people who's the best fits for certain like situational places, right? And then we can create these like if-then statements that allow people to like qualify or disqualify out of the own situation.
I think it's a good point too, in reorienting yourself around saying like, I can become the educator for the space or for this industry. The thing to answer your initial question, Nick, which is like, why is there a lack of it? I think it's because people are saying to themselves, well, how would I do it? Right? Like if I'm going to make a best of, like who are the best trucking companies? Immediately I'm going to be faced with the dilemma of, well, how am I going to rank them? Because I can't just do it based on my opinion, because that's not going to work. That's not going to build trust. So then how would I do it? And that requires work to figure out how you would actually do that. Like to what Will's saying, like, especially if in your industry, you don't have that educator, you're not going to have an example to go and look at and say, oh, well, that's how you do it. You actually have to do the work to figure out, well, how can we teach this? How are we going to do it? And that's hard. And so that's why you probably see a lack of it. It's a reorienting too. Will, I love what you said, because it really is a reorienting of making that conscious decision. I need to educate somebody on an industry that might know nothing about it. And that's hard because we've got the curse of knowledge, but somebody's got to do it. If we take a really basic example, I bought a air fryer, a Ninja Foodie. Can I say that? Because they don't sponsor us. I bought a Ninja Foodie like 2 years ago. And I started off my journey with what are the best like air cookers or air fryers, whatever you call 'em. And I wasn't doing that because I was just going to pick whatever was first on that list. It's because I don't know what's out there. I have no idea. I've never bought one before. I didn't know what was the best, what was the worst, what was a good investment, what was not. My intention in searching for what is the best is just let me get familiar with what's out there and what are the brands that I should be looking at. That's where I was at. That's where I needed to start my journey. For many of our customers, that's where they're at as well. They just don't know. They've never bought the thing. They're not familiar with the space. They're not familiar with who the players are. They're not familiar with the brands. But when we say, you know what, if that's where they're at, we're going to help them understand. We understand the players in this game. We understand the products and services out here. So we can tell them what is the best to Will, in your example, for them. Can't say what's the best overall, but we can help people understand what's best for them.
But there's a fear that comes with doing this that I think is what prevents the majority of people who are like, right, I get it. But it's like, I'm not just going to publish something on my website that has a list of everybody else who does the same thing that I do, especially there's a lot of commodity categories that makes this really difficult. Highly differentiated categories that no one's quite like us. So there's a lot of situations where people just get afraid to do it. It's like, how do you get over that?
Well, I'd be curious to see what Will has to say about this. But what I have done with many of my clients is I tell them don't start with listing off your competition. That's a really complicated place to start. I want you to start with how do I pick the best blank? And in that, I just want you to list what's the criteria that somebody should use to find the best for them. That's it. That's all I want you to do. I don't want you to say anybody's name. I don't want you to say you're the best. I don't want you to say what. I just want you to give them what would be the criteria they should use to make this decision. Then once they've done that, I can go, okay, well, look at what we've done here. So is it possible that using the criteria that you've listed out here, you could now create another article which talks about what companies or brands or products lead in that given category of criteria? Right? That seems to be much easier now because they started with the decision making. They started thinking like the buyer, and then we started doing the harder stuff. That's what I found has worked best for me.
Yeah, I've done something really similar, Zach. I think some people hear this or read this, or they see the infamous Marcus quote, "The best pool companies in Virginia," and they see it as like shock value almost, or like novelty. It's like, it's so push pull that it's earning us sales. And then they throw their hands up and it's like, that's not going to work for our space. And they're missing the real core of what this is it's not here to be shock value or like we're willing to put our competitors on our company's website. That's how proud we are of our company, because you're right. That is a wrong battle to pick first. If you're starting to educate your buyers, it's a huge internal conflict. I just did this with an insurance company owner. I said, how many quotes have you given in the last 2 years? He goes, over 2,000. I said, great. How would you go buy insurance today? If you just bought a motorcycle, walk me through what you would do. Someone that's so deep in the forest, and list off the step-by-step guide. And I promise you, we're going to have a valuable piece of content. It may not be an article on your website. Here's another thing some of us may be asking. It's like, this isn't where my buying process starts for my buyers. They don't Google the best of list and then start buying insurance or something that's like complicated B2B. But go make that thing and then figure out when your buyers do need it. A lot of B2B companies use their best of articles as a thing that they send to people before their first meeting with them. It's assignment selling content for places like that. So I see this as a few like glass ceilings to break through. First is, how do we believe that we deserve to be the educators in our industry is step one. And then step two is, when do our buyers need to know their options for themselves? And step three, how do we present that information before they have to ask us for it? For many companies, that's a blog on the Learning Center. For many companies, that's an awesome piece of content to send before you're meeting with someone for the first time or before the demo call.
Ooh, let me mention something on that too. And Nick, I'm probably getting way ahead of the questions you're going to ask us, but it's hot on my mind right now. So here's another question. Once you have the content, when should you use it? Well, that actually ties back into how you produce the content, because we can assume that if somebody gets into the latter stages of the buying process, and at any point, no matter how effective you were at selling, and no matter how good you look right now, no matter how great you've positioned your product, if they get to a point where they feel like, you know what, I didn't do a good job of looking at other options. If that creeps in the latter stages of the buying process, you can assume that deal's slowing way down. That's when indecision creeps in. So guess what? We get ahead of that. We help them and tell them early on, have you looked at other options? Are you familiar with what some of the other criteria should be that you should be looking at here? We get ahead of that stuff before it ever comes up. So when we get people in the latter stages of the buying process, they're already saying to themselves, I've done so much work. I've evaluated this so well. There is nothing more for me to do here but to make a decision. That's a beautiful thing.
You went exactly where I was going to go with this. This is just as much of a sales motion as it is a marketing motion. Like, yeah, marketing creates the collateral, and yeah, there's some search engine optimization stuff going on there that we'll touch on later on. But like, this helps people self-select especially in the buying process. So you went exactly where I'm thinking of all of this. One of the things that comes up so frequently on this subject, which is always interesting, is like, why do people want to learn this from us versus like, yeah, G2 exists. Yeah, Google reviews exists. And I'm sure there's some player in your space that aggregates reviews and stuff like that for a lot of different categories. Like, why your own site or why your own marketing materials? I think people have a hard time getting over that. So, Will, I know you deal with this one a lot. I'm curious what you have on that.
Yeah. So this isn't the same for every industry. I think like I have to help companies see they have direct competition. It's like the substitutes for the offering that you could go buy instead of buying your thing. And then they have informational competitors, right? You're a furniture company in Kentucky, but your informational competitor is the Home Furniture magazine, because both of them want to teach you how to decorate your furniture or decorate your living room. So when you start, when you're making content for the world, you have to think about your informational competitors, not your direct competitors. And more particularly, like let's say I'm a software company and G2 just owns this space for me. And I know everyone that's choosing between HubSpot and Salesforce is definitely coming here and seeing the comparison table, seeing the cost breakdown before they even think about going to one of HubSpot or Salesforce's website. I'm doing that myself for sure. And then what I'm going to do next is go to both of those websites, because I'm not a dumb buyer, because there's not a lot of dumb buyers out there anymore. And I think what I'm looking for more than anything is affirmation that what I'm hearing on like the gospel, the G2 of the world, the thing that's unbiased, has no reason to point me in the wrong direction, seeing that it's the same on the website, that there is like overlap or like reaffirmation of what I believe from the actual unbiased third party is there. So as someone that has that like competitor already in the space or that informational winner, you're looking at that saying, how do we continue this journey of where someone's starting their education on our website? Like, how do we yes and all of this stuff and reaffirm it ourselves? That's why HubSpot has a HubSpot versus Salesforce article living smack dab on their website, continuing the table that G2 has. And if you don't have that person in your space, you get to go be that person, because people are likely asking for it or going to a bunch of fragmented like third parties asking for the answers to questions that don't have the place today.
The HubSpot Salesforce one is a good example. So before I was director of demand here, I was a HubSpot consultant, and I've helped dozens of companies purchase HubSpot. And so this is great. So you said there's the higher up comparison. It's HubSpot versus Salesforce. People will want to read all about it, understand it. They're going to go to each individually. It's not like the binary thing happens on G2. In some very rare cases it may, and some may just jump right in. But most people are going to go to both. And where HubSpot can really thrive, like if you're HubSpot, you're going to say, well, which hub is right for me? Which hub is best for me? And then you're going to list out all the different criteria that help someone understand what are the things that they need. You can say, what level, what tier do I need? Free, starter, pro, enterprise? Like, what tier is best for me? And that's a very big difference between what is the best CRM in the world versus which one is the best for me. And whoever can win that information battle, like we were talking about, like with the furniture and stuff, it's like Salesforce might not educate people in that same way, but they sure compete in the same space. And if HubSpot does a better job at educating their buyers, people are going to feel a lot more comfortable making a purchase from them because they're going to feel like they made the right decision because they had all the facts. They had it all spelled out for them. So this is true in a whole variety of different industries. Tech is an easy one. I mean, you see a lot of comparison tables on websites and stuff, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many more micro decisions that have to be made in order to complete a purchase like that.
Yes, dude. 100%. One thing that you mentioned that I think gets overlooked is like people think they're going to go make the best of article that's the top of the industry first, like the general best of. And that's a huge mistake as well. It's way easier for HubSpot to go make the like best of from a tier level, like getting more niche, more specific. This can look like for a customer type or a product category or like a buyer persona that you're making like best of blank for X situation first. Because if you're a company doing the Ask You Answer, you likely have tens, if not hundreds, of best of articles that are slightly formatted for certain people on your website.
When I was setting up this episode, and I was talking with our director of content, John Becker, and one of the things he brought up about the best of stuff that gets on this granular level that we're talking about is like we work with an architecture firm, and they're doing reviews and best of content around different flooring options because those are the tiny micro decisions that their customers need to make in order to complete their project. And they are the ones providing that information. So they're helping people buy. And you would never think specifically, oh, well, what are the like best architecture firms in my area? Sure, that's like you said, that's too high level, right? You can do this on a much smaller scale for the thing that you sell to help people make those decisions to buy. And that's actually the type of content that their buyers are way more interested in because those are the little things that most often get overlooked when you're doing business with someone, especially like an architecture firm. You would usually have to sit there and say, okay, well, what type of flooring options do I need? Well, we have a bunch of options. You sit there and they rattle it all off, but that's not the way that people prefer to consume the information and shop and make those types of decisions. Zach, I see you nodding. You got something?
Well, for one, I just think it's a really great example of any types of home services you're doing. There are adjacent decisions that need to be made. We've had a handful of clients that are in the HVAC space, right? Now, they have to make reviews and best of content of different types of air conditioning units, of different, ways to heat and cool your home or your building. Like those are things that they have to get over in order to make a sale. So this applies to so many of us. There's adjacent things. It's like even with us here at Impact, we've got to help people decide if they're going to buy HubSpot. It's a really great example. And if we can't help them make that decision, it's actually going to slow us down. So we don't have any choice but to deal with that. I think it's a really great example. The architecture firm was talking about best flooring options. The other thing I was going to mention too, and Will, you kind of alluded to this. I want to go a little bit deeper. You said, we think we're going to create an article, and this is naive for almost any content you produce. Say you create an article and it's going to be the number one thing. It's going to bring you all this traffic and all these customers. And that's the way that it works. It's really not how it works. It's really not how it works. The way this works is that when you're thinking about the things that would slow that customer down, you're addressing them. They're there on the website, you use them in the sales process. Eventually, if you're doing that well enough, Google will recognize that people will spend time with it and they'll come to you. But it's not the fact that you rank number one that's going to bring you the business. It's how you address the thing. It just so happens that now the way that Google works is that the better you address the thing, the higher you're going to rank. All right. But we got to get our priorities straight there. The other thing that I was going to say, and I'll wrap up with this, is you said, well, why should we address it on our website? Why would people want to come to our website to look at that thing? First of all, go punch in a what is the best for me on ChatGPT or one of these AI things, and you see the quality of answer it's going to give you. Okay, you could do better. You want to know why? Because you're a human who can make recommendations. I've talked about that at length in other episodes. So that's the first thing, right? So you could address it. You could address it well. The second thing is, even if somebody else has addressed it, you're going to tell me if a customer came to you and they asked you, so what are some of the other options I have? You're going to say, oh, that person over there addressed it. Go read it from them. You're not going to do that. You don't have choice but to address these things. The idea isn't, are they going to come to my website to learn about it? It's like, no, are you dealing with it now? And what are you doing to deal with it? Like, how are you teaching it? How well are you doing it in your own local economy, whatever that looks like for you? Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Don't worry about where people go right now to learn the thing. You got to teach it too.
That's a big one on like the best of, like Will brought up, the best pool builders in Richmond, Virginia. Like, that's a shock and awe type of article. But a managed IT services firm in Connecticut, when someone looks up managed IT firms, they're going to get a list. Everyone knows who all the players in the space are. They're going to find them. And then they're going to naturally gravitate towards the ones that provide that type of information. And those are the people, especially in those industries that have like relatively low like customer turnover. Like one of our chief strategy officer calls them set it and forget it industries. Most people don't think about their managed IT service partner unless something goes wrong and they need to do like rip them out and hire a new someone, or they've come of age and they need to hire someone. They need to do some research. So it works exceptionally well in those things. And on the sales end, it's really where you're going to win. There's some SEO things with this, like Zach alluded to, but the sales side is really where you're going to win. So one of the things that we get a lot on these is what happens when competitors start to do this. Like if someone in my space sees it, what happens when other people start to do this? Isn't that just going to dilute what's going on here?
Well, let's turn the question back on itself. So what if your competitor started answering people's questions? Right? It's like it's just, and the reason I put it that way, Nick, is because we hear this all the time. It's like, it's this natural inclination for us as marketers, as salespeople, as business owners to really obsess and think over the competition versus the person who's right in front of us that we want to do business with. This is the unpopular thing that I'll say about what if your competitors do it. And really competitive people don't want to hear this. But if your competitors start openly and honestly addressing how things are, what things cost with the other players in the game, guess what? You're all doing your service, your industry and your customer a great service by doing so. You're going to be part of a very positive change in that industry. But here's the sad truth. That won't happen. You don't really go into many industries and you see everybody just telling everything, right? Just being open, honest, raising up the customer. Hey, we'll tell you whatever you want to know. You don't see that. And so as much as it is a fear of ours, first, if it happens, it would be great for your industry. But second, it rarely happens. Rarely happens. Great question though, Nick. Sorry if my frustration's coming through. I deal with this a lot. It's like, gosh.
No, man, I think that's important because that's the fear, and fear overall is what prevents you from doing most of the stuff that we talk about on a show. But I think the bigger thing is what my competitor, like it's the number one thing that people bring up. And I think you bring up a good point. It's like, if they're not, like, what if they start answering customers' questions? Like, yeah, that might actually, like, if you don't, they're going to probably win a little bit more business. And so I think it's good for buyers. And one of the things that we do, I was working with our chief strategy officer on this one, Chris, and about how do you architect like a sales process, and how do you figure out the types of decisions people need to make in order to move forward with a purchasing decision, not just outline these arbitrary stages. And so when we make this type of content, it helps put all these things into perspective for you. And so you stop thinking about your competitors. You stop thinking about, well, what if they started doing this? You start thinking about your buyers, because they're the only people who pay your bills. I don't know, our competitors don't come in and keep the lights on. So I don't know. Maybe some other industries they did. I could be wrong.
So here's what's funny about this obsession with our competitors too, especially when it comes to like online behaviors. If you sit down with most leaders who are so afraid of what their competitors might copy or duplicate or also do in their strategy, and you ask that leader, so when was the last time you went to their website and you saw something they were doing, and so you said, let's do the exact same thing? And they're going to say, I don't think I've ever done that. Okay, so what is causing you to think that they're sitting over there staring at your website all day going, you know what, we need to be doing what they're doing? It doesn't happen. What does happen is you get like bottom feeders. Like I've had clients that they're doing so good with their content that like scammers and stuff will literally duplicate. They'll just copy and paste whole website pages and whole articles and stuff like that. That's what little bottom feeders do, right? They're like trying to scam and do. Your legitimate competitors aren't that obsessed with you that they're watching so closely and saying, we need to do exactly what they're doing. It just doesn't happen. But we have this fear that it does. Anyways, that's just my side rant.
But it's the truth, man. And I think that's an important thing. Sometimes you got to show the mirror, right? So when we create this has always got me interested, right? So when we create this type of content, we're analyzing like the micro decisions that people need to make in order to move forward with a purchase. And if we can help educate them on making that decision, we become the solution, right? The psychology of it is that like if we have articulated their problems so well that they know and they're confident in our ability to provide them with a solution. And so this helps, like I was saying before, right? This is how we've even re-engineered our entire sales process, is looking at it through this lens. It's like understanding all of the decision points, that the major decisions people need to make. One, how do we create content around that helps people make those decisions? And then how do we engineer the sales process in a way that moves buyers forward by way of making those decisions?
Yeah. I'd even add to that, and I'd be curious to see what Will has to say about this, because this might be a little bit controversial. So the degree at which we, can actually help people get over indecision, I think is not in direct reflection as to how great one single article is or like how brutally honest we are. It's just how much of that decision can they make with us. So let me rephrase. Let's say it's the continual education and therefore somebody spending a lot of time with you that builds the bond, that builds the trust, that builds the relationship, closes the trust gap. It's not going to be one single article that answers one single question. And so when I see companies are just like so worried about one little article and like one thing and it's not good enough, whatever. It's just like, you know what, ship it and move on to something else. Address as best you can and move on. Because what actually matters is how much time they will spend with you and how many questions you can address and how much of that decision they can make with you versus like how perfectly you answer this one thing. That's why even with best of content, I alluded to this earlier, you're going to have to come up with criteria in which and how you do this. Criteria doesn't have to be perfect. Start with the basics. Like Will's example. If you were buying insurance today, how would you do it? Same thing. If you were going to look for somebody in this industry, what would be the criteria you would use? Talk about that. And then ship it. Doesn't have to be perfect. With reviews, same thing. Does it have to, Nick and I, Will, have you heard of vacuum wars?
Oh yeah.
Nick and I
We're big
talked
on
about
vacuum wars around.
Yeah. We talked about it way too long, like a few episodes ago. But that is like is such a perfect example of a review because they put these vacuums through like these incredible tests that most people would never think of. And it's like really elaborate, whatever. It's like, but you don't actually have to be that level of product reviewer or service reviewer of your own thing. You just need to talk. You just need to teach. You just need to get it out there. And again, you string enough of these things together. They spend enough time with you. That's what builds the trust, not one single thing. Will, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Man, you know what's so funny what happens when you feel different than your competitors when you start educating people? Like I think a lot of people start their buyer's journey thinking about what is my consideration set? Like, what should I even be considering to go solve this problem for me? Which typically comes out as like the best for me in some way. That then usually leads people to say, all right, I've got like 2 or 3 companies or 2 or 3 products that I'm still considering here. And I'm going to click through to the reviews of those things. I'm going to go hear the pros and cons, like why people go with this one, why people go with that one, what they love about it, what they hate about it. And if we've done those things well, it's crazy how when we start addressing the information that people need to know from us, that they stop coming up with new questions to ask. They just start to trust us as being the informational providers. Man, I heard this from a roofing company the other day. They made this big push of like, we just want to be the best website on the planet that helps people understand what financing a roof looks like. And we want to be super honest about the financing process around buying a roof. People only buy these things every 15 years. So no one's really an expert in buying a roof. And you would not believe how many times people get to the house and they go, man, the way that you guys were talking about financing, like I just can tell you have the information on your sleeve. You're so open and honest. Like I trust you with any topic. I don't even need to talk about them with you. I'm going with you. And it's unbelievable how once we put someone in shotgun, they don't need to have a bunch of mental calories burned. They just start to trust everything that we say, that we have this like well-beaten path of a process, not in a manipulative way, but just in a like, if you can talk about that in that way, I trust you with anything else. I don't need to ask all the questions I thought I was going to today. It's crazy how that happens.
Well, it's like what Zach was saying. It's a combination of hundreds of touch points that closes the trust gap. Like it's not this one article that like we always like to say, oh, well, they Googled this thing and they got through and that's where the purchase came from, this one specific moment. It's like, use the analogy, it's like that one time you brush your teeth is the reason you don't have cavities. It's because you brush your teeth every day. So when it's a combination of all these touch points and the fact that you're, like you were saying, it's like you're always there and you always seem to articulate the thing that I don't understand in a way that helps me understand it. So brush your teeth every day. That's the moral of this one. Thanks for coming. So let's do this. I think I got one last thing, and then we'll jump into some questions here. But there are a lot of businesses out there that are going to go into the highly differentiated routes. We've covered a lot of things that were, let's just call them the more like common commodity sector, stuff like that. Like I hate to say it, like a roof or something like that. Like there's a lot of people that do a lot of the same things, and it's hard to stand out and doing what we've been talking about here. There's a ton of different ways to be able to do that. But there's some people who are like, there's no one like us. How do you create content like this in those situations when you have a solution like that? And well, I know you've worked with some interesting companies. So I'm curious to get your take on this one.
How do we create content when we're so different? Oh, this is a fun one. A little on the nose. Frankly, I think it makes it easier. Like the people that I think have the biggest challenge with the best of content are the people that are viewed as commodities, right? Because then it's usually like a race to the bottom on cost, or you're talking about like convenience in some way or something along those lines. When you're so different that you don't have an offering that is the perfect substitute to yours, the if-then statements that whether you make sense to be a fit for them becomes a lot clearer, a lot less like splitting hairs. So I challenge people to think of like, if they're not going with you, what are their options between like not even direct competitors, but like your substitutes or inaction likely is people that feel so different are usually dealing with inaction more than anything else. And then go make the things that allow people to say, like, if this is your situation, then you should be considering doing this. If this is your situation, you should be considering doing this. It doesn't always have to be this like apples to apples comparison. It can be, you have this problem set, or you think you do, and here's the 5 ways someone could go about solving it, or the 6th way they could do nothing at all. That's how I would at least kick someone off to think about it.
I think the takeaway is people are comparing you to something. Like no matter how you position yourself, no matter what you're doing, people are comparing you to something, if it's an adjacent category or not. And that's hard for a lot of people. Like I know in the category creation space, especially in like B2B SaaS is a big one. B2B products or services in general kind of suffer from this. No one's quite like us. And being able to just like create the separation. This is a great place to create separation between you and adjacent categories that people often lump you into. Because the way that buyers think is no matter what you do, we're going to lump businesses and services and all those things into a category that we understand and we can wrap our heads around, especially if you're that different. And so this is a great way to kind of create that wedge.
Yes. I think we all feel this in ourselves, but it's a good reminder of how the buyer's thinking. It is human nature to categorize things and then to contrast those things from each other, right? When we're thinking of the best, all we're thinking of is how is that different from this? That's all a comparison really is, or a best of article, so that you have some relative reference point in your little buckets in the back of your head. And if you don't think that, you think your buyer has a bucket just for you and it's a snowflake in there, you're fooling yourself. There are substitute options that they're considering to go solve your problem, even if it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Dang. That was good. Yeah, a good example of this. Because I'm glad that we're covering this in this episode too, because I imagine there's many folks that are listening to this. In fact, a large percentage of folks that are listening to this, and they are that highly differentiated solution. At least they think they are. All right. So they're going to hear this. Us talking about, hey, you need to be talking about who's the best. You need to be talking about what's the best. You need to be talking about other people. You need to be giving reviews, whatever. They're thinking to themselves right now, yeah, but we're different. And it's funny how quick we are to say that we're special, but not willing to do the things that would actually make us special. What Will said there, let's simplify it even further. Uber is a taxi you call with your phone, but it's still a means of transportation across town. eBay is a garage sale, but it's online, but it still helps you acquire things secondhand. We fit things into categories in that way. So even if you are truly the one that is different out of the other 100 people, if you're solving a similar problem and it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, right? They're going to lump you in with everybody else. So you can't lead with, well, we're not going to talk about them because we're so different than all of them. Donald Miller once gave this great analogy, which is how you actually differentiate, which is by using something people already know to teach them. And this is just a little bonus tidbit I'll throw in here today, because doesn't necessarily have to do with best of, but it kind of does. So if I had a lawn care business and I said, I'll come around, I'll cut your grass, I'll blow off the driveway, I'll trim the trees, whatever. That might be of value to you. That might be what you're looking for. But if I roll up and I say, so there's a lot of people out here that will cut your grass, trim your trees, blow off your driveway. That's not exactly what we do. We make your home the most beautiful home on the block, so that when you're driving up your driveway, you're proud to be home. Now, same service, same thing is happening, but I'm just leading with an outcome. And by leading with an outcome, I actually do look radically different, even though I'm doing the exact same thing. But I didn't say I don't do those things. I just said with me, my obsession is that you get pride of driving up your driveway versus just checking a box that your lawn is is mode. That's the way we need to communicate in the way that we talk about reviews, the way we talk about best of. We don't put competitors down. We don't put ourselves up. We recognize we might be lumped in with everybody, and we talk about the outcomes that we want to see. And by doing that, that's what actually closes the trust gap.
Go at it.
Boom.
You feel that landscaper in your heart.
I would start a landscaping business right now just with that sales pitch. I'd be like, I'd make a killing if I had that sales pitch.
Yeah, you don't need anything else.
Any landscapers here listening you just got the strategy. If anyone has any questions, feel free to either throw them in the chat if you want to come off mute, have a chat with us. We'd love to have you. Otherwise, I got a few here in the DMs that I can go through. So this one comes up a lot. So we'll start here first. Where do you get started doing stuff like this? I think more specifically, it says, where does my marketing team get started, right? In relevant content like this.
Well, let's consider all of the big five in that question. Cost and price, problems, comparison versus best of reviews. Big five, as we've talked about at length in previous episodes. Make a spreadsheet, and across the top of that spreadsheet, I want you to list each product or each service that you have. On the individual rows, I want you to put cost and price, problems, comparisons, best in class, reviews. And then I want you to go through and fill in the whole thing. So you've got a big five piece for every product or service, and then make it specific for that thing. So let's use the landscaping example for a minute, just because that's what we just talked about, right? Let's say cutting the grass is one service and trimming the trees is another. In your column under best of, you might go, who are the best lawn care services for, just taking care of my lawn. Other might be, what are the best tree maintenance companies? Right. So even just doing this exercise, you're actually starting to think more specifically as to each service, thinking more like the buyer. That's where I typically have my clients start. A very similar exercise to that.
I'm the same. The only thing I would add on for clients that have like really long sales processes or only a few deals moving, just big whales, is to get specific with what is in your deal pipeline today. Like, rather than going and trying to make this new generic article, go make something that is coming up in a meeting in 2 weeks for I don't know if you're selling homes or something along those lines. Make the thing that that buyer needs before the call. And I promise you're going to find a way to use that piece of content after the fact later. And at a minimum, you incrementally improved one sales process that you have going through right now.
I got a little sidetracked because Michael asked a question in the chat, so I went to grab a link for him. But it said, talk about breaking down the buyer's journey into micro pieces to create content around those findings. So adjacent to kind of like best of and the reviews content we're talking about, but we recently published an article called How to Fix Your Sales Process by asking one simple question, and it directly addresses what Michael was asking. So basically it's saying that it's like, how do you frame the questions that you ask when you're setting up a sales system internally? What questions should you be asking yourself and your team in order to architect that process? It's not so binary as I read a book. They told me I need an explore stage, a discovery stage, a demo stage, and a pitch. Like, that system is old school and it just doesn't work. Buyers absolutely hate it. And this is we try to create this fork in the road. And there's a point where when businesses are like, I'm creating a sales process versus I'm creating a buying process. The sales process is for us as a business. We're selling stuff to people. The buying process is a process that we create to help people buy the thing that we have that helps them use our solution. And so what we did was we basically documented our own process and the questions that we ask ourselves, the questions that we would ask our clients when we help them stand up a sales process internally. So it's good read and it's good listen. And basically leverages on the point of leverage is the single question is, what decisions does a buyer need to make in order to choose us? So it's incredibly powerful. I would encourage anyone to check it out. I linked to it. There's a Spotify link in the chat, but it's on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
That's a good shout. It's something that I think any client that's coming through coaching and training with us, it looks so different for every business as well, what their buyer's journey is, that like we have to spend 2 or 3 solid hours just mapping that out and whiteboarding it with any company, because they do end up looking totally different from each other. But I say the exact same thing that you just shared, Nick. And then to get the salespeople that we're coaching into the mindset of what they ask you answers in the sales process, I try and simplify it as core as just this. All they ask you answer is for a sales process is obsessing over the questions that are being asked at every stage of your buyer's journey, and then answering that question, and then giving the answer to that question before future people will have to ask for it. And that seems to click for salespeople, where they're like, whoa, I'll just give them the questions and considerations they should be asking before X appointment or X touch point in our buyer's journey, because this is the stuff I hear when I'm in these meetings. And all of a sudden people have way less questions when I'm giving them those things ahead of time.
Powerful stuff, man. It's exciting stuff.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, everybody.